A single decision, a single act of prejudice can cost a fortune. For Aerovista Airlines, that cost was $4 billion. This isn't a story about a disgruntled passenger. It's the story of Dr. Isabella Vance, a titan of industry who was publicly humiliated and wrongly removed from a flight for the color of her skin. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They mistook her quiet dignity for weakness and her tailored suit for a costume. They were about to learn that the woman they cast off the plane held the power to ground their entire future. This is the story of how one woman's humiliation became a legendary lesson in corporate karma. Dr. Isabella Vance did not believe in luck. She believed in preparation and probability. At 46, she was the founder and CEO of Vance Capital Partners, or VCP, a private equity firm that had, in the span of 15 years, become one of the most feared and respected players in the global market. VCP didn't just acquire companies, it resurrected them. Isabella had a preternatural gift for seeing the hidden value in distressed assets, the glimmer of a future in the ashes of corporate failure. She saw patterns where others saw chaos, opportunities where others saw only risk. Her mind was a fortress of data, fortified by an intuition so sharp it bordered on clairvoyance. She grew up in a modest neighborhood in South Chicago, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a city bus driver. From them, she inherited a fierce work ethic and an unshakable belief in the power of numbers. While other kids were playing outside, Isabella was devouring books on economic theory and running statistical models on a clunky secondhand computer. She earned scholarships that propelled her through the University of Chicago and then Harvard Business School, where she graduated at the top of her class. She was a quiet force, never the loudest person in the room, but always the most prepared. Her colleagues on Wall Street initially underestimated her, a young black woman in a world dominated by old white men. It was a mistake they rarely made twice. VCP was her magnum opus, built from the ground up with a team she'd handpicked for their brilliance, loyalty, and shared vision. They were a diverse crew of hungry analysts and seasoned strategists who mirrored her own relentless drive. Together, they had orchestrated some of the decade's most audacious financial maneuvers. They had saved a legendary automotive supplier from bankruptcy, transformed a dying print media conglomerate into a digital powerhouse, and financed the development of a revolutionary biotech patent that was now saving lives. Isabella Vance didn't just move money, she built legacies. On this crisp Tuesday morning in September, she was on her way to finalize the largest deal of her career. It was a deal so monumental it had been given a code name worthy of a military operation, Project Apex. For 2 years, VCP had been meticulously assembling a consortium of investors, massive pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and private family offices, to finance the complete overhaul and privatization of the aging, inefficient Terminal 2 at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. The price tag was a staggering $4 billion. The plan was revolutionary. They would demolish the old structure and build a state-of-the-art facility designed for the future of air travel. Biometric security, automated baggage handling, sustainable energy sources, and a passenger experience that felt more like a luxury resort than a travel hub. The anchor tenant, the primary beneficiary of this new terminal, was to be Aerovista Airlines. Aerovista was a legacy carrier, an American institution struggling to shed its reputation for poor service, constant delays, and aging fleets. Project Apex was their lifeline. A dedicated world-class terminal at JFK would allow them to streamline operations, attract high-value business travelers, and rebrand themselves as a premium airline. Their CEO, a slick, silver-haired corporate raider named Richard Theron, had staked his entire reputation on this deal. The agreement was practically done. All that remained was the final signing ceremony in New York, a carefully orchestrated media event to announce the dawn of a new era for Aerovista and JFK. Isabella was flying from her home base in Chicago. She always flew commercial, usually first class, but she eschewed private jets. She believed in staying connected to the world she was trying to reshape. Her travel routine was a model of efficiency. One carry-on, a sleek carbon fiber rolling case that contained everything she needed. Her laptop with its encrypted files, a portfolio of the final deal documents, a change of clothes, and a small lead-lined pouch. Inside the pouch was the prototype of a next-generation quantum computing chip developed by a startup VCP was funding. It was priceless, irreplaceable, and the reason the bag could never, under any circumstances, leave her sight. As she walked through the bustling O'Hare terminal, her mind was already in New York, running through the final points of the press conference and the cascading series of financial transfers that would be initiated the moment her pen left the paper. She was dressed in her typical armor, a dark gray, impeccably tailored suit, a simple silk blouse, and low heels that were stylish but practical. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her only jewelry was a classic watch and a pair of simple diamond earrings. She projected an aura of quiet, unassailable authority. She arrived at the gate for Aero Vista Flight 812 to JFK with 20 minutes to spare. The boarding area was a chaotic swirl of anxious travelers and weary airline staff. The flight was overbooked and the tension was palpable. Isabella found a quiet seat, pulled out her tablet, and began reviewing the latest market reports, her focus so absolute that the surrounding noise faded into a dull hum. She was Dr. Isabella Vance, a builder of empires, on the cusp of her greatest achievement. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The universe, she believed, was unfolding according to a well-prepared plan. But probability, as she well knew, always had a margin of error. And today, that margin was about to walk up to the podium and make a boarding announcement. The voice that crackled over the intercom was sharp, frayed at the edges with an impatience that suggested a long and difficult day. We will now begin boarding Aero Vista Flight 812 to New York JFK, starting with our first-class passengers. Isabella gathered her belongings, slipping her tablet back into her briefcase, which sat atop her rolling carry-on. She joined the short line of passengers in Zone 1, her mind still partially occupied with the details of Project Apex. She was the third person in line. The gate agent, a harried-looking man, scanned the first two tickets without a word. When Isabella stepped forward, she offered a polite smile. He grunted, scanned her boarding pass, and waved her through. She walked down the jet bridge, the scent of recycled air and jet fuel filling her nostrils. At the aircraft door, she was greeted by a flight attendant. The woman, whose name tag read Brenda, had tightly permed blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her tired, cold eyes. "Welcome aboard," Brenda said, her tone flat and rehearsed. "Good morning," Isabella replied warmly, stepping into the first-class cabin. It was a standard layout with spacious pod-like seats. Her seat 2A was on the port side. As she moved to place her rolling case into the overhead bin, Brenda's voice sliced through the quiet cabin. "Ma'am, that bag is not going to fit." Isabella paused halfway through lifting the bag. She glanced at the case, then at the bin. It was a standard-sized international carry-on, designed specifically to fit in the overhead compartments of most commercial aircraft. She had used this very bag on this very model of plane dozens of times. "I'm quite sure it will," Isabella said calmly, maintaining her pleasant demeanor. "It's a standard size." Brenda stepped forward, blocking her path. She crossed her arms, her posture immediately adversarial. "Our bins on this aircraft are smaller. It looks too big. You'll have to gate check it." The request, while annoying, was not unusual. The delivery, however, was laced with an inexplicable hostility. Isabella knew the priceless, delicate prototype in her bag could not be checked. The risk of it being lost, damaged, or X-rayed by aggressive baggage scanners was too great. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Isabella explained, her voice still even. "This bag contains sensitive electronic equipment that cannot be checked, but I can assure you it will fit. If you'll just let me try." "I said it won't fit," Brenda snapped, her voice rising in volume. A few other passengers who were settling into their seats glanced over. "Now, are you going to check it, or are you going to hold up the entire boarding process?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. Isabella felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling of being seen not as a person, but as a problem. She was no longer Dr. Vance, CEO of VCP, a valued first-class customer. In Brenda's eyes, she was just a black woman who wasn't following instructions. "There's no need for this tone," Isabella said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more measured, more precise. It was the voice she used in boardrooms when faced with a belligerent executive. I am a frequent flyer with this airline. I know the baggage policies, and I know the dimensions of this bin. Please allow me to simply place my bag. She tried to maneuver around Brenda, but the flight attendant physically shifted to block her again. No, you people are always trying to bend the rules. This bag is getting checked. You people, the phrase landed like a punch. The ambiguity was the point. It was a weapon designed to inflict a wound while offering the attacker plausible deniability. The cabin, which had been humming with the low chatter of boarding passengers, fell silent. Everyone was watching now. The polite fiction of the first-class sanctuary was shattered. "Excuse me?" Isabella said, her eyes locking onto Brenda's. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial calm that was far more intimidating. "What did you just say?" Brenda's face flushed, a flicker of panic in her eyes before it was replaced by hardened defiance. She had an audience now, and she was doubling down. "I said the bag needs to be checked. I'm not going to argue with you." She reached out to grab the handle of Isabella's suitcase. It was a line crossed, a violation of personal space and property that was utterly unprofessional. Isabella pulled the bag back instinctively. "Do not touch my luggage," she commanded. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried an astonishing weight of authority. It was the voice that could silence a trading floor. The confrontation had now reached a stalemate. Brenda, red-faced and indignant, refused to back down. Isabella, composed but resolute, refused to surrender her bag. The pilot briefly poked his head out of the cockpit, saw the commotion, and quickly retreated, wanting no part of it. Brenda, realizing she was losing control, decided to escalate. She spoke into the small phone connected to the gate. "I need a supervisor at the door of Flight 812. We have a passenger who is refusing to comply with crew instructions." A few minutes later, a man in an ill-fitting Aerovista manager's uniform appeared. His name tag read Robert Sterling. He was a man who clearly enjoyed the small fiefdom of authority the airline had granted him. He surveyed the scene with a world-weary sigh, as if this was a tedious but frequent part of his job. He didn't speak to Isabella. He addressed Brenda. "What's the problem here?" "This passenger," Brenda said, gesturing at Isabella as if she were a piece of furniture, "is refusing to check her oversized bag. She's holding up boarding and being disruptive." Sterling turned to Isabella, his gaze dismissive. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask to see the bag. He delivered his verdict. "Ma'am, you heard the flight attendant. We're on a tight schedule. Check the bag or you'll have to leave the aircraft." The injustice of it was breathtaking. She hadn't been disruptive. She hadn't raised her voice. She had been targeted, insulted, and now threatened. The other passengers watched, a mix of discomfort and morbid curiosity on their faces. No one intervened. They were all sealed in their own little bubbles of self-interest, eager for the plane to just take off. "Sir," Isabella began, choosing her words with surgical precision, "I have attempted to explain that this bag contains sensitive and irreplaceable business materials. I am not being disruptive. I simply asked for the chance to demonstrate that the bag, which is a standard carry-on, fits in the bin. Your flight attendant has refused, insulted me, and physically blocked me. I am the one who has been treated unprofessionally." Sterling's eyes glazed over. He wasn't listening to her words. He was waiting for her to finish so he could repeat his ultimatum. "I don't have time for a debate. Are you checking the bag?" "No," Isabella said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am not." "Fine," Sterling said, a cruel little smirk playing on his lips. He turned and spoke into his walkie-talkie. "I need security at gate C22. We're removing a non-compliant passenger." A wave of disbelief washed over Isabella, followed by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. This was no longer about a suitcase. It was about dignity. It was about a system that allowed two employees, drunk on a thimbleful of power, to publicly humiliate a customer based on their own ingrained prejudices. Two airport security officers arrived moments later. They were professional, their faces impassive, but their presence was a profound escalation. They stood behind Sterling, their hands resting near their belts, a clear show of force. "Ma'am," Sterling said, his voice now loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, "for the last time, either you give me the bag to check, or these officers will escort you off the plane." Isabella looked at Brenda's triumphant sneer. She looked at Robert Sterling's smug face. She looked at the other passengers who were now deliberately averting their eyes, pretending to be engrossed in their phones or the safety card. And in that moment, she made a decision. She would not fight them. She would not create a scene that they could later use to paint her as hysterical or aggressive. She would let the absurdity of their actions play out to its logical, disastrous conclusion. With a grace that seemed to defy the ugliness of the situation, Isabella Vance picked up her briefcase, took hold of her rolling carry-on, and turned to the security officers. "That will not be necessary," she said, her voice resonating with a calm that was more unnerving than any shout. "I will leave on my own." She walked past Sterling and Brenda, her back ramrod straight, her head held high. As she stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge, she didn't look back. She was already calculating. The signing ceremony in New York was a bust. The media event was canceled. But her day, she realized, was far from over. Project Apex was dead, and Aerovista Airlines just had no idea what it had done. The probability of their success, which had been near 100% just 10 minutes ago, had just dropped to 0. Isabella walked back up the jet bridge, the rhythmic click of her heels on the metal floor, the only sound in her self-contained world of fury. The gate area was now mostly empty, the last of the economy passengers having shuffled aboard. The gate agent who had first scanned her ticket pointedly avoided her gaze, suddenly busy with a stack of paperwork. The entire apparatus of Aerovista had closed ranks to eject her, and now it was pretending she didn't exist. She didn't stop to argue. She didn't demand to speak to another manager. That was what they expected. That would have been a waste of her time and energy. Instead, she walked to a deserted corner of the terminal, sat down in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, and placed her carry-on beside her. For a full minute, she simply sat, breathing slowly and deliberately, allowing the raw, hot emotion of the humiliation to wash over her and then recede, leaving behind the cold, hard bedrock of her intellect. Anger was a fuel, and she was about to use it to power the most sophisticated engine at her disposal, Vance Capital Partners. She pulled out her phone. Her first call was not to her lawyer, but to her chief operating officer, a brilliant, no-nonsense man named Julian Croft. He picked up on the first ring. "Isabella, you should be in the air. Everything all right?" "Julian," she said, her voice perfectly level. "Change of plans. I'm still at O'Hare. I was just removed from Aerovista Flight 8012. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Julian knew Isabella. He knew her composure. For her to be removed from a flight, something extraordinary and outrageous must have occurred. "Removed? What on earth happened? Are you okay?" "I am fine. I was targeted by a flight attendant and a ground supervisor over my carry-on luggage. They were unprofessional, abusive, and ultimately escorted me off the flight." She recounted the events succinctly, without embellishment, including the 2 words that had ignited the entire situation. "You people." Julian's response was a string of curses that were uncharacteristic for the normally composed COO. When he finished, he took a deep breath. "What do you want to do? I'll get legal on this immediately. We'll sue them into the ground. I'll call Richard Theron's office directly." "No," Isabella interrupted, her voice firm. "This is beyond a lawsuit, Julian. A lawsuit is a negotiation. This is a statement. I want you to initiate Protocol Sable." Another silence, this one longer, heavier. Protocol Sable was VCP's doomsday switch. It was a pre-planned series of actions to be taken in the event of a catastrophic deal collapse or a major betrayal by a partner. It was designed for maximum financial impact, to be executed with overwhelming speed and force, cauterizing VCP's exposure and decimating the other party. It had only ever been used once before, to dismantle a fraudulent shell corporation in Southeast Asia. Activating it for this was unprecedented. "Isabella, Protocol Sable?" Julian's voice was laced with awe. "For an airline incident, the target is Aerovista, but the collateral damage will be the entire Apex project. That's $4 billion. That's the Port Authority, the pension funds, 2 years of work." "I am aware of the scale," Isabella said calmly. "Aerovista is not just a contractor in this deal, Julian. They are the anchor tenant. The entire financial model for the new terminal is predicated on their long-term lease agreements and projected passenger volumes. Without them, the project is untenable. Theron and his airline believed they were indispensable. They are about to learn that everyone is replaceable. She could hear Julian typing furiously. Okay, Protocol Sable is being initiated. First step is to freeze all pending capital transfers related to the JFK Apex Holding Company. That's a $750 million tranche that was scheduled to move this afternoon. I'll stop it now. Good, Isabella said. Next, I need you to arrange a conference call. Get me Jonathan Reed from the California Teachers Retirement System. Get me Sheikh Al-Jamil from the ADIA Sovereign Fund. And get me Eleanor Vance, no relation, from the Heritage Trust. Get all the major limited partners on a line in 60 minutes. I will explain the situation to them myself. They're going to want to know why we're torching a $4 billion deal over a rude flight attendant. Then you will tell them, Isabella instructed, that VCP has just received incontrovertible evidence that the management culture at Aerovista is fundamentally broken. It is a culture that permits and encourages frontline employees to abuse customers, creating unacceptable levels of liability. It is a culture of arrogance that flows from the top down. We have lost all faith in their executive leadership, specifically Richard Theron, and their ability to act as a reliable partner in a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. This incident was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a deep-seated corporate disease, and VCP does not invest in disease companies. Her words were precise, clinical, and devastatingly effective. She was reframing the personal insult as a catastrophic business risk, a due diligence failure on the part of Aerovista's leadership. It was a language their investors would understand perfectly. I'm on it, Julian said, his voice now filled with grim purpose. What is your next move? I'm booking a flight to New York on a different airline, Isabella said, and then I'm calling our head of communications. We're going to need to get ahead of this. Aerovista will try to paint me as the villain. We need to make sure the world knows the truth before their PR machine even has a chance to warm up. After hanging up with Julian, she made her second call to her legal team, instructing them to prepare for any fallout and to formally notify the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey that VCP was halting all work on Project Apex, effective immediately, citing a breach of partner confidence. Her final call before the conference was to a young, hungry journalist she knew at the Wall Street Journal, a woman named Chloe Sterling, who had a reputation for breaking major corporate stories. Isabella gave her the exclusive and off-the-record briefing on the entire incident and the financial earthquake it was about to trigger. She knew that by the time the market opened tomorrow, the story wouldn't be passenger kicked off plane. It would be $4 billion airport deal collapses after CEO of Vance Capital Partners removed from flight. Within the hour, she was sitting in a quiet airport lounge belonging to a rival airline, patched into a secure video conference with the most powerful investors in the world. Their faces displayed on her laptop screen were a gallery of concern and confusion. She calmly and methodically laid out the events of the morning. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't appeal to emotion. She presented it as a case study in corporate risk. A company that allows its employees to treat any customer with such contempt, she concluded, her eyes meeting each of theirs through the screen, is a company with a rotten core. Their CEO, Richard Theron, has fostered an environment where prejudice is permissible and customer dignity is disposable. Would you trust such a company with your teachers' pensions, with your nation's wealth, with a $4 billion investment that depends entirely on their reputation and performance? I will not, and I will not stake VCP's reputation on such a broken partner. Therefore, I have advised my team to unwind our position. Project Apex, as we know it, is over. There was a moment of profound silence as the weight of her decision settled. Then, one by one, they gave their assent. Jonathan Reed from the pension fund, a man who managed hundreds of billions of dollars, nodded grimly. We stand with VCP. This is an unacceptable liability. We're out. The sheikh, after a brief consultation in Arabic with an advisor off-screen, simply said, "We concur." The decision was unanimous. The call lasted less than 15 minutes. In that time, Isabella Vance had calmly and deliberately dismantled a $4 billion enterprise. She closed her laptop. The quiet hum of the airport lounge seemed louder now. From her window, She could see an Aerovista plane pushing back from its gate, its logo a bold V that now seemed to stand for vulnerable. They had pulled a CEO off their plane. She had just pulled the ground out from under their entire future. The first tremor hit Aerovista before Richard Theron had even finished his morning croissant. It came in the form of a frantic call from his CFO, a perpetually anxious man named Gregory. Rich, the $750 million tranche from VCP hasn't arrived. It was due an hour ago. The bank is saying the transfer was frozen. Theron, sitting in his palatial corner office overlooking the Dallas-Fort Worth landscape, felt a flicker of annoyance. It's probably just a paperwork snag. Call Vance's people. Get it sorted. He was more concerned with the press release for the JFK signing ceremony. He wanted the wording to be perfect, to maximize his own role in the historic deal. I tried, Gregory stammered, his voice tight with panic. I can't get anyone on the phone. Julian Croft's assistant said he was in an emergency meeting and hung up on me. Something's wrong, Rich. This isn't a snag. Before Theron could respond, his own assistant buzzed him on the intercom, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. Mr. Theron, Chloe Sterling from the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. She says it's urgent regarding the collapse of Project Apex. The words didn't compute. The collapse? What is she talking about? The deal isn't collapsing. We're announcing it today. He took the call, his voice oozing a confident bluster he did not feel. Chloe, always a pleasure. What's this rumor I hear you're chasing? Chloe Sterling's voice was cool and professional. Mr. Theron, I'm running a story for tomorrow's front page. I have confirmation from multiple sources within the VCP Investment Consortium that they have pulled all funding from the JFK Terminal 2 project. My sources say the decision was made after VCP's CEO, Dr. Isabella Vance, was forcibly removed from Aerovista Flight 812 in Chicago this morning. Can you provide a comment? Theron felt the blood drain from his face. The opulent office suddenly felt like a closet. Isabella Vance? Removed from a flight? It made no sense. He mumbled something about needing to check the facts and hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He immediately called O'Hare Station Operations. It took 20 minutes of barking at underlings to get Robert Sterling, the duty manager, on the line. Sterling, puffed up with self-importance at getting a call from the CEO, proudly recounted the incident. Yes, sir, Mr. Theron. We had a disruptive passenger in first class, a woman, refused to follow crew instructions regarding her carry-on, became belligerent. We deplaned her per protocol. My team and the flight attendant, Brenda Jenkins, handled it by the book. What was her name, you idiot? Theron roared into the phone. Vance, Isabella Vance, Sterling said, the pride in his voice instantly evaporating, replaced by a dawning horror as he connected the name to the deal that every single employee knew was the company's future. Theron slammed the phone down. The deluge had begun. By noon, the story was breaking online. The Wall Street Journal had published Chloe's article, a meticulously sourced bombshell that laid out the entire sequence of events. It had everything: a powerful, respected black CEO, a public humiliation, and a staggering $4 billion consequence. The narrative was clear and devastating. Worse still, a passenger in the first-class cabin, a tech blogger who recognized Isabella, had filmed the final moments of the confrontation on his phone. Robert Sterling's condescending ultimatum and Isabella's quiet, dignified exit. The video, uploaded to social media, went viral within minutes. The hashtag AerovistaShame was trending worldwide. Aerovista's stock, which had been climbing for weeks in anticipation of the Project Apex announcement, suddenly nosedived. Traders were dumping the stock in a frenzy. On screen, Theron watched in horror as hundreds of millions of dollars of shareholder value evaporated every minute. His phone was ringing incessantly with calls from furious board members. His PR team, caught completely flat-footed, scrambled to craft a response. Their first instinct was to attack. At an emergency press conference late that afternoon, a visibly flustered Richard Theron stepped up to the podium. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. While the situation on Flight 8112 is regrettable, he began, reading stiffly from a prepared statement, Aerovista stands behind our crew. They are trained professionals who followed standard procedures to de-escalate a situation with a non-compliant passenger. Airline safety is our top priority. We cannot and will not allow any passenger, regardless of their status, to disrupt the boarding process or refuse the instructions of our flight crew. A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Are you saying Dr. Vance was a threat to safety?" Our crew felt the situation was becoming untenable, Theron deflected. Another reporter yelled, "Did your flight attendant use the phrase, 'you people,' when addressing Dr. Vance?" Theron's face tightened. "We are conducting a full internal investigation into the matter." The press conference was a disaster. He came across as arrogant, dismissive, and completely out of touch. He hadn't apologized. He had blamed the victim. He had implicitly endorsed the actions of his employees. On a day when he was supposed to be celebrating his greatest triumph, he was instead defending his company against accusations of corporate bigotry and incompetence. The fallout was swift and brutal. Major corporate clients began calling to suspend their travel accounts with Aerovista. Celebrity influencers and politicians publicly announced they were boycotting the airline. Rival airlines, smelling blood in the water, began offering status match programs specifically targeted at Aerovista's frequent flyers. By the end of the trading day, Aerovista's stock had lost 28% of its value, a paper loss of nearly $2 billion, half the value of the deal they had just lost. The company's reputation was in tatters. Richard Theron had taken a small, containable fire started by two reckless employees and poured jet fuel all over it, creating an inferno that was now threatening to consume the entire airline. Meanwhile, in New York, Isabella Vance checked into her hotel. She had issued a single powerful statement through her communications chief. "VCP has a zero-tolerance policy for bigotry and disrespect. We invest in partners who share our values. The leadership at Aerovista has shown today that they do not. We wish them well, and we will be redirecting our capital towards partners who understand that dignity is not a negotiable commodity." The statement was praised for its clarity and strength. Isabella was being hailed as a hero, a powerful woman who had used her immense financial power to deliver an unforgettable lesson in consequences. The deluge that was drowning Richard Theron and Aerovista was, for Isabella, just the tide turning in her favor. For Brenda Jenkins and Robert Sterling, the reckoning came faster than they could have possibly imagined. The morning after the incident, they arrived at work feeling like heroes. They had in their minds upheld company policy against a difficult passenger. They expected commendations, perhaps even a small bonus. Instead, they were both summoned to the office of the head of O'Hare operations. They were not offered a seat. The executive, a grim-faced woman who had been on a series of apoplectic calls with corporate headquarters since 3 a.m., slid 2 termination letters across the desk. "You're both fired," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Effective immediately. Your security credentials have been revoked. Please collect your personal belongings from your lockers and be off airport property within the hour." Brenda was aghast. "Fired? But we followed protocol." She was non-compliant. "You followed protocol?" the executive sneered. "You publicly humiliated one of the most powerful businesswomen in the country. You insulted her, refused a reasonable request, and escalated a minor issue into a corporate catastrophe. Your protocol has, to date, cost this company over $2 billion in market capitalization and a $4 billion strategic partnership. You are not employees. You are liabilities we are now cutting loose. Get out." Robert Sterling tried to argue, to bluster his way through it as he always had. "You can't do this. I have a union." "Your union has already been notified," she replied coldly. "They saw the video. They're not touching this. Now leave before I have security escort you out, just like you did to Dr. Vance." Their worlds collapsed in an instant. They were marched to their lockers, their walk of shame witnessed by their now former colleagues, who averted their eyes and whispered amongst themselves. Within a week, their names and faces were infamous in the aviation industry. They were blacklisted. No other major airline would hire them. Brenda, who had 20 years of service, lost her pension. Robert, who had built his entire identity around his manager's uniform, was reduced to applying for jobs as a night watchman at a suburban mall. In their attempt to exercise a tiny amount of power over Isabella Vance, they had lost everything. The reckoning for Richard Theron was slower, more public, and far more brutal. His disastrous press conference had sealed his fate. The board of directors, a collection of powerful corporate titans who sat on multiple boards, were incandescent with rage. They were not angry about the prejudice or the injustice. They were angry about the incompetence. Theron had allowed a manageable customer service issue to spiral into a full-blown existential crisis for the company. He had destroyed shareholder value and made them all look like fools. They convened an emergency board meeting 2 days after the incident. Theron, armed with charts and presentations from his PR team, tried to outline a recovery plan, a public apology campaign, discounted fares, a new diversity training initiative. The board's lead independent director, a formidable old industrialist named Harrison Kane, cut him off mid-sentence. "Save it, Richard," Kane said, his voice a low growl that commanded the attention of the entire boardroom. "We've all seen the numbers. We've all been fielding calls from panicked investors. You're not talking about a recovery plan. You're applying a Band-Aid to a severed artery." Another board member, a sharp woman who ran a major retail chain, piled on. "Your handling of this has been a masterclass in what not to do. You didn't investigate. You didn't apologize. You attacked a woman who held the fate of this company in her hands, and you did it on national television? Did you really think she wouldn't respond?" Theron tried to defend himself. "This is an overreaction by the market. Dr. Vance's decision was emotional and vindictive, not based on sound business logic." "Don't you dare," Kane thundered, slamming his hand on the polished mahogany table. "The logic was perfectly sound. Her logic was that you, Richard Theron, are an arrogant fool who leads a company with a culture so toxic it could cost her investors $4 billion down the line. And you know what? After watching you this week, I'm inclined to agree with her. She didn't see you as a reliable partner, and frankly, at this moment, neither do we." The final vote was a formality. It was unanimous. Richard Theron was to resign as CEO of Aerovista, effective immediately. He would receive no golden parachute, no severance package beyond his contractual minimum. The board wanted to send a clear message. His failure was total and unforgivable. He left the boardroom a broken man. The swagger was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of defeat. In the lobby of the corporate headquarters he had ruled like a king just days before, a large television was broadcasting a financial news channel. A picture of Isabella Vance was on the screen, the headline beneath it reading, "The Vance Effect, How One CEO's Stand is Reshaping Corporate Accountability." Theron stared at the screen, at the image of the woman he had dismissed as a mere passenger. He had seen her as a nuisance, a problem to be swatted away. He never saw her as his equal, let alone the architect of his demise. He had underestimated her, and in the ruthless world of corporate power, there was no greater sin. The reckoning was complete. The king was dethroned. The jesters were banished, and the castle they had so carelessly defended was crumbling around them. In the weeks following the Aerovista implosion, the financial world watched Isabella Vance with a mixture of fear and reverence. She had demonstrated a terrifying willingness to scorch the earth to defend a principle. But Isabella had no interest in being a destroyer. Her genius lay in building, and the $4 billion that had been earmarked for Project Apex was not going to sit idle. VCP's investors were expecting a return, and she was determined to give them one. She instructed her team to find a new opportunity, a better one. They were to look for an airport partner that was hungry, innovative, and had a proven track record of excellent customer service. And they were to find an airline partner that could be the anti-Aerovista, nimble, beloved by its passengers, and with a leadership that understood the value of a positive corporate culture. The search led them away from the behemoth hub of JFK and back to Chicago, to the city's often overlooked second airport, Midway International. Midway was smaller, more efficient, but constrained by aging infrastructure. The city of Chicago had a long-term plan to expand and modernize it, but had struggled to find the private capital to make it happen. It was the perfect opportunity. Simultaneously, her team identified the ideal airline partner, Starlight Air. Starlight was a smaller, fast-growing carrier known for its friendly staff, generous policies, and fiercely loyal customer base. They had consistently ranked #1 in customer satisfaction surveys for years. Their CEO, a charismatic and forward-thinking woman named Sarah Jenkins, had built the company culture around a single, simple principle: Happy employees create happy customers. They were profitable and well managed, but lacked the gate access at a major hub to compete with legacy carriers like Aerovista on lucrative business routes. Isabella arranged a meeting. She flew to Starlight's headquarters in Denver, on a Starlight flight naturally, and was struck by the difference. The gate agents were smiling. The flight attendants were genuinely helpful. The entire atmosphere felt lighter, more positive. The meeting with Sarah Jenkins was less a negotiation and more a meeting of minds. Sarah, who had followed the Aerovista story with rapt attention, understood immediately what Isabella was offering. "You're not just offering us money, Dr. Vance," Sarah said, her eyes alight with excitement. "You're offering us a kingdom, a brand new state-of-the-art terminal at Midway, making us the dominant carrier in Chicago. It's a game changer." "I'm offering you a partnership," Isabella corrected her. "VCP will provide the capital to build what we're calling the Horizon Gateway. It will be the most technologically advanced, passenger-friendly terminal in North America. Biometric check-in, seamless security, beautiful lounges, sustainable design. In return, Starlight Air will be our anchor tenant. You will get preferential gate access and co-branding rights. Together, we will make Midway the new standard for air travel in America." The deal came together with incredible speed. VCP, its investors, the city of Chicago, and Starlight Air formed a powerful new consortium. The $4 billion war chest was redeployed. The new project, the Horizon Gateway, was announced at a massive press conference at Chicago City Hall. Isabella, standing beside the mayor of Chicago and Sarah Jenkins, delivered a speech that was thinly veiled shot at her old adversaries. "Capital has a choice," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It can flow to the old arrogant institutions of the past, or it can be used to build the innovative, respectful institutions of the future. Today we choose the future. We are investing not just in steel and glass, but in a philosophy. The Horizon Gateway will be more than a building. It will be a testament to the idea that how you treat people, your customers, your employees, your partners, is the single most important asset on any balance sheet. We are proud to partner with Starlight Air and the City of Chicago, two organizations that exemplify this principle." The announcement was a sensation. The business world hailed it as a stroke of genius. Isabella hadn't just gotten revenge. She had turned a disaster into an even better business opportunity. She was taking her capital and her prestige and using it to build up a direct competitor to Aerovista in its own backyard of Chicago. For Aerovista, it was the final, devastating blow. While they were mired in bankruptcy proceedings, laying off thousands of employees and selling off aircraft to stay afloat, their new competitor was being handed the keys to a gleaming new castle, financed by the very money that was once meant for them. The karma was brutally, poetically complete. Isabella Vance hadn't just torn down the old house that had insulted her. She had used its very bricks to build a magnificent new palace for its rival, right across the street. The Phoenix Project had risen from the ashes of Project Apex, and it was poised to soar. 2 years passed. The world of aviation had been reshaped by the echoes of that single confrontation on Flight 812. Aerovista Airlines, after a painful and humiliating bankruptcy restructuring, had survived, but as a shadow of its former self. It was eventually acquired by a larger competitor, its brand name relegated to the history books, a cautionary tale taught in business schools about the astronomical cost of arrogance. Richard Theron was last seen trying to launch a small, unsuccessful consulting firm. Brenda Jenkins and Robert Sterling had faded into obscurity, their moment of petty tyranny having led them to permanent professional exile. On a bright, windswept Chicago afternoon, Dr. Isabella Vance stood on a stage under the soaring, light-filled atrium of the newly completed Horizon Gateway at Midway International Airport. The terminal was a masterpiece of design and technology. Sunlight streamed through vast electrochromic glass panels that adjusted their tint with the position of the sun. Passengers glided through security checkpoints that used advanced facial recognition, their faces, their boarding passes. Automated robotic porters silently transported luggage. The air was clean, the spaces were open, and the atmosphere was one of calm efficiency. The terminal was a resounding success. Starlight Air, now the dominant carrier at Midway, had seen its profits and market share skyrocket. They had expanded their routes, hired thousands of new employees, and were consistently winning awards for both customer service and operational excellence. The Horizon Gateway had become a destination in itself, revitalizing the airport and the surrounding Chicago economy. Isabella, dressed in a vibrant blue suit that stood out against the terminal's clean white lines, stepped up to the podium for the official inauguration ceremony. The crowd before her was a sea of faces: politicians, investors, airline executives, and hundreds of Starlight Air employees in their cheerful uniforms. 2 years ago, she began, her voice resonating through the vast space, we were presented with a choice. A moment of profound disrespect could have become a source of bitterness. An act of prejudice could have been met with a lawsuit and a quiet settlement. A collapsed deal could have been written off as a loss. But we chose a different path. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. We chose to believe that capital can have a conscience. We chose to believe that accountability is not just a buzzword, but the bedrock of good business. We chose to believe that the best response to a culture of decay is to build a culture of excellence right next door. She gestured to the magnificent terminal around them. This building is more than just an airport. It is a symbol. It is a symbol of what can happen when you invest in decency. It is proof that the way you treat the person in seat 34B is just as important as the price of your stock. It is a monument to the simple, powerful idea that respect is the ultimate currency. As the crowd erupted in applause, Isabella saw Sarah Jenkins, the CEO of Starlight Air, beaming from the front row. Earlier that morning, as Isabella was walking through the new terminal, a young Starlight gate agent had rushed over to her. The young woman, seeing the powerful CEO, had simply wanted to thank her. Because of you, Dr. Vance, the agent had said, her eyes shining. I have a job I love with a company that respects me. Thank you. That single moment meant more to Isabella than the billions of dollars or the glowing headlines. It was the real return on her investment. She concluded her speech, her voice filled with a quiet passion. So let this place be a new horizon, not just for Chicago, not just for air travel, but for all of us. A reminder that we always have a choice. We can accept the world as it is, or we can invest in the world as it ought to be. Today, together, we have chosen to build. The applause was thunderous. Isabella Vance smiled. The numbers on the balance sheet were excellent. The deal was a triumph, but the real victory was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she had faced down ugliness, and instead of just destroying it, had used its energy to create something beautiful, something better, in its place. The karma had not just been a circle of revenge, it had been an upward spiral of progress. Isabella Vance's story is a powerful reminder that true power isn't just about wealth or position. It's about the willingness to use that power to demand respect and enforce consequences. She faced a moment of deep, personal humiliation, an experience all too familiar for many, and turned it into a $4 billion lesson in corporate accountability. She didn't just get mad, she got strategic. Her story proves that one person's refusal to accept injustice can trigger a seismic shift that reshapes an entire industry. It's a testament to the fact that in the corporate world, as in life, karma isn't just a concept, it's a strategy. If you found this story of justice and consequence as compelling as we did, make sure to hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself can change the world. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have more incredible stories of karma, triumph, and unbelievable real-life drama coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.